Quite literally, the fastest way to increase your earnings or earnings potential is to raise your price. And yet bidding is still one of the least developed skills of most freelancers and solo consultants. So in this video, we're going to walk through a quick system and bidding calculator simply to help you make more informed bids on your upcoming proposals. We'll cover this in 4 steps. We will talk about the basic project details and inputs for this model. We will discuss some additional factors that are worth keeping in mind. We will talk about how to read some of the various charts and outputs of the model. And finally, we'll discuss how to take note of your bids history or bidding history and make the most of this in your future proposals. So let's begin with the basic project details. These are the first inputs that we will be putting into the bidding calculator model. At the bottom of this page, you'll notice that there are some more details about each of the inputs, which you can follow up on if you're not quite sure, or you can just track along with this video. So for the first section, you'll notice there are 4 inputs. There are the hours expected for this particular project. So let's just step back briefly and remind ourselves that the goal of this calculator is to help us make a more informed bid. So a prospect has told us that they're interested in perhaps working together and they'd like some more details for what a project or what this engagement might look like. And part of those additional details will be a budget and a timeline. So for yourself, we're going to use this hours expected value or this input just to be an estimate for ourselves of how many productive hours we're going to need to put into this. This isn't the number of 8-hour working days where you sit at your desk and try to work. This is really the number of hours that you will actually need to spend focusing on the project. So for this example, let's say that it's 40 hours, as it happens to be in the example. The minimum hourly rate is going to be a personal or a subjective value, which is just going to be your own minimum living cost. So this hourly rate multiplied by your total available hours should cover your basic living expenses. Now, this value may not be relevant for many of you. It may be very important for some of you. And so we just want to make sure that we have our bases covered and that we're not putting in a bid which couldn't actually cover ourselves with our basic living expenses. So that's going to input and help us define our minimum viable bid. We can talk more about these outputs later, but for now, minimum hourly rate is your own personal minimum rate that you know you need to be meeting in order to hit your own living costs. The ideal hourly rate is what it sounds like. This is what we would like our hourly rate to be. Now I'm saying hourly rate quite a bit in this little section, even though I think we're going to talk a bit more about value-based pricing as a model that makes sense for many different freelancers and consultants out there. However, having a rough idea of what our true hourly rate really looks like, we can input that into this field here. And this final value is going to be the expected return on investment for our client. Now, the way that we reach this value will naturally differ from project to project. It can be a little bit more involved. And it's something that we do want to spend a bit of time getting as accurate as possible with whatever information we happen to have. So this is another reason why collecting as much detailed information during an introductory call with the client can really help. If you can collect any numbers such as the average customer value for this particular client's business, the number of new or renewed customers that your project is aiming to bring, perhaps the value that you're bringing is instead a matter of time savings or a matter of money saved as the result of your project, or perhaps it's more to do with some new opportunities that you'll be bringing. Again, this really depends on your services and your business, what you're offering with this particular project. But what we would like to do is really try and get a figure, a number for what ROI can the client expect from this particular project. So if I were building a website for this particular client, maybe it's improving an existing website, and they expect it to, the improvements to the website itself, if it's all done well, they expect it to bring in an extra 100 customers in the next year. Now, depending on the value of those customers, that can tell us a lot about what the value of this project would be. So if just the website alone they believe is going to bring in an extra 100, and for this particular example, let's say that each customer, their average lifetime value is 300, or their value over the next 12 months is, and that's how long the website will be up, let's just imagine, then we have 300 multiplied by 100, and we have 30,000 as the expected ROI for the client. Now, this is going to directly impact the value-based bids, which we have, but for now, let's just make sure everyone understands how we're calculating this value. Next, we're going to consider 4 additional factors that are really just relevant to us. In the previous section, we talked about the client's perspective, the value that we hope to bring them and their business. Now it's time to kind of introspect and think a little bit about, okay, what are the positive added benefits for us as freelancers or consultants or solo business operators, and what are some of the additional costs that are not necessarily in the hours and the pricing that we've just outlined in the previous step. So 4 factors. First, we're going to have a 1 to 5 rating for the urgency of the project. This is the urgency that the client is feeling. And a very simplified way of thinking about it is, the more urgent that this project happens to be for the client, the more of a premium we should feel comfortable charging. And that's not simply because the client is in a greater need. It's also because there's more pressure on the project. There's less time to extend it. There's less room for revision and moving things back and forth. And so it's an added cost for you yourself. It's you can safely charge a premium because the client is in need, and is in need of a high quality solution quite quickly. And so the higher the urgency rating, the higher the premium that we will be kind of building into our own bid for this project. The stress level is also an additional cost for us, kind of personal. It's like a personal tax on our experience of the project, and it's a subjective rating. It's something that will take into account the project itself. Maybe it's a high stakes project, and that's going to make it more stressful. Maybe you have a lot of things going on outside of this particular project. Maybe the timing is off. And so if it is, the question to ask here is really, how much additional stress will this project put on you? And that should have some weight in terms of the bid that you should be willing to accept. So a high stress project, you should be giving yourself a bit more breathing room, and sometimes the price point is the best way to do that. If it's a very low stress project, a 1 out of 5, then it really will have very little effect on the price point. Portfolio is a factor for us to consider in terms of what would this project, if completed well, look like on my portfolio. How beneficial would it be? And again, this is not to say that you should take on projects purely for the fact of adding them to your portfolio, but there are some instances where it can be really helpful. For example, if you're trying to move into a new vertical, maybe you're trying to start working with accountants or dentists or some other specific segment, and you don't have much experience, or you don't have much in your portfolio yet that you can show. And so perhaps in that case, if this client happened to be a very promising project for your future portfolio, you could rank that as quite high on this value. And good fit is kind of a summary of all factors from first client interactions, how it seems you're getting along, how interesting their business is. This is kind of the more human aspect of the bidding and pricing project, which is kind of in your own internal state of mind. How do you feel about this project? Are you excited about it? Will it be enjoyable to work on? The more promising and exciting the project is, or the better the fit that it feels, that should have some weight on the price that you give as well. So once you've made the main inputs for this project, you'll notice that there are 5 charts below, and this is a causal model which has been embedded into the workspace. If you're curious to build your own causal models or learn more, I think you can click this link here and go directly to their page. But this is editable from inside of the Notion block that we've linked. The first chart that we're going to see is going to show us our value-based bids. The second chart will show us our minimum viable bid. Third chart will show a different view of our value-based bids. The fourth chart will show us our minimum versus ideal rate. And this bottom chart is going to display the values or the weights that have been given to those additional factors which we talked about in the previous step. So what do all of these mean? Effectively, what we have are 5 possible bids that we could make for this project. They are a low, mid, or high value-based bid. So this is the value-based pricing approach, which is going to take the expected ROI for the client as its main piece, and then charging a varying percentage of that expected ROI plus some other costs to our own proposal bid. That's kind of one side of the bidding approach. On the other side, we have these 2 values, which are our minimum and ideal rate bid. So this is kind of an hourly rates approach to bidding, whereas this chart is a value-based pricing approach. The minimum versus ideal rate is simply going to take our minimum hourly rate multiplied by the hours expected plus a little bit extra just to have some breathing room. Naturally, the ideal rate is going to take this ideal hourly rate and do a similar process for it. Our value-based bids are going to use the expected ROI for the client plus some of these additional factors. Now, how are these additional factors weighing in to the bid? We can get a direct number value for each of these factors from this view. So you'll notice that the urgency value is 122, stress value 41, portfolio and good fit are both at 102. The urgency and stress values will be added to our bid as almost a bonus. You can think of as a bonus. So high urgency and high stress projects, we're going to add as a bit of a bonus to the total price of our bid. The portfolio and good fit values are going to be discounted because those are positive benefits for our business. So we can play around with this a little bit. There's not going to be too much of a noticeable difference, but let's say we ramp up the urgency and the stress values to 5. We're going to see that our lowest bid here has gone to 2.7, 4.5 is the mid, 5.7 as the, or 5.8 now. If we change these to the higher values and we reduce these bonuses, you'll notice that our bids are changing accordingly. You'll also notice that it's kind of a subtle change, as it should be. These are additional factors. They're not the number one consideration for any bidding process, but they do have some weight which should be considered. So those are the main charts. And from these charts, we can derive perhaps our different bidding tiers. We can decide which approach we want to take. And quite importantly, we also have our minimum viable bid, which is something that we just always want to keep in mind before taking on a project, because if we go below this value too often or at all, then we really do put ourselves in risk of not meeting our basic costs, which is not a good place to be. And as a final step in this video, we're going to return to the home view of the stack if you have the kickoff stack. If not, we can link this bids history table as well to the video or to this block. But what we're going to do is just briefly consider how this bidding history, any past wins and the price points that we had, how that might contribute to our final bid along with what we learned from the calculator. So once we've spent some time with our bidding calculator and we find a bid that we're happy with, let's say we want to go for this mid value-based bid, 5.1 thousand for however long that project happened to be. We can also compare that against our history, our win history. So this is a very limited history which hasn't been filled out, but as you make more proposals, as you send them out, as you keep track of which were selected, which were perhaps got some feedback that the bid was too high, and which were accepted, we can also just use that as an additional step to check, okay, 5.1 is a bid that I would be comfortable with given the value-based or the expected ROI and the value-based pricing that I want to charge. How realistic is it based on my history with similar clients? So this is just a final step to kind of ground ourselves. If you're confident in the value, then, and if it has been, if the expected ROI has been well calculated, then go right ahead and bid what you learned from the bidding calculator. But this is just kind of an added step if you want to ground yourself before writing up and sending out an official proposal. So we hope that on your next project, you can take a few minutes to make use of this bidding calculator to input the relevant project details, to consider some of the additional factors that may weigh in, to take a look at the charts and the outputs that the bids or the recommended bids at different price points, and then to take a final look at your bidding history and how that may affect the success rates of this